This is just something that is so important. I want to get out the word about it. I think it's biblical. I think it's incredibly compelling to people. And it really goes against expectations. And this has kind of come up a little bit in our conversation. But the whole thing about going before God and seeing this.
Welcome to the Revo Report. We're inspiring faith with reason and reason with faith.
Personal God who loves you intensely. People will say, oh, people are in their most desperate times, they're seeing what they want to see, or they're seeing what they are expecting from their ideas of death. Typically, these experiences are not going along with people's expectations. Let's take a Christian, for example. A Christian expects that in their final death, and if you have a heart attack, you think you're dying, you don't think, oh, I'm about to die and then I'm going to be resuscitated. Probably you're not going to be resuscitated. Probably that is your final death. So you're thinking, what's going to happen at my final death? Well, I'm probably going to go to the other side, come before God, whatever. You're not thinking, I'm going to come out of my body, look down and go, oh my goodness, that's me lying there. And then talk to some angels, then have a life review. What we're experiencing is something that's a halftime experience. It's not the end of the fourth quarter. So this is not what Christians are expecting in an experience. It's certainly not what non-Christians and atheists and secular people are expecting, which again shows the dying brain hypothesis says what's feeding into this consistent experience if it's not your expectations and your expectations are going against this. And look at a lot of other religions too. Some religions are not talking about a personal God. Some are not talking much about love being an overpowering characteristic. Like in Islam, I've read the whole Quran. I teach world religions, and it really doesn't say much about love. It says God is forgiving. If you come to him, he'll forgive you, and if you start living right, he'll forgive you. But typically, if you search the words love in the Quran, in a searchable Quran, it's usually saying God does not love people who live this way. God does not love people. It's not saying God loves everybody, for God so loved the world with this intense love that Ephesians says is beyond our understanding, the height, the depth, the love of God, which surpasses comprehension. And yet people go to the other side and they're like, God loves me. And God knows me, little me, sitting here in Ackworth, Georgia, in a little office in my home. God sees me as an individual and loves me. That is not expected globally of people, or even here in America or in Canada.
Yeah. Wow. And what would you say? Because I want to put in some objections here that maybe some people might allude to. What would you say to someone who says, well, you know what, this, how can you call this scientific? Because this can't be scientifically studied. So could you talk about your methodology and how in defending that, actually, we can call this scientific, the studies on it?
Sure. When I was doing my dissertation on deathbed experiences, the supervisor over my dissertation was a scientist with a background in biology. And he just said right up front, he said, I'll tell you up front, I don't really believe in these experiences. And I said, well, that'll be good. I said, you can push back on them. But one thing that he said as I was writing was, he said, I don't really understand what you're doing is scientific. You need to explain that better in your dissertation. So I thought, okay, no problem. I'll just go to these basic 5 or 6 steps of the scientific method and just show how it's scientific. I went to the library at Kennesaw State, where I teach, and looked up in dictionaries and encyclopedias, how do you define science? And all in these authoritative works, the definitions were not consistent. They all contradicted each other. So one person would say, well, science is just about physical things, that you can see and feel. And then another one would say, no, it's about anything that you can study with the scientific method. Well, what is the scientific method? It differed in all those sources. Then I went to the bookstore and looked at the most current textbooks. And in their introductions, they would often say, what is science? What is the scientific method? They all differed. Finally, I started finding somebody had actually done a study of textbooks. I forgot how many scores of textbooks, and found out for sure there's no consistent definition. So if somebody thinks to be scientific, you've got to be able to replicate whatever the experience is in a laboratory, then this is not scientific. But if they're going to take that kind of definition of science, then a lot of astrophysics is not science, because you can't replicate the Big Bang in your laboratory. It would be dangerous and probably pretty difficult to do. So there are all kind of things we believe in. What about gravity? Can you touch and look at it? Can you put it in a test tube? No, we know gravity because of the effects of gravity. So whenever somebody says this is not scientific, I'll say, how are you defining science and the scientific method? I think that what we need to do in science is to use the appropriate methods for the appropriate fields. So if you're in legal science, you're evaluating testimonial evidence in a scientific way. We know that certain people are not to be trusted because they've got skin in the game, or they've got a reason to want this person to not be convicted or to be convicted. And so we know, we shouldn't really take that testimony very seriously. But if somebody is testifying against a mafia kingpin and it's putting their life at danger, you're saying, why would these people be lying? So I think we can use evidence as we see it in legal evidence, scientifically done legal evidence, but it's also a combinational approach. So Rees is an astrophysicist, I believe, at Cambridge University. He wrote a book called Just 6 Numbers, I believe it's called, on the settings of the universe. And he said, early in the book, he said, I didn't really believe in the Big Bang for a while. He said, but eventually, they're just the evidence accumulated. There was we saw the radiation from the Big Bang. Then we saw the light shift in stars, showing that the universe is moving away. It's expanding. But then he said it wasn't until the 1990s that several other lines of evidence came together. Now, he can't see the Big Bang, but the evidence accumulates. It's a cumulative case. So that's what I found as well. It's applicable to historical studies. It's applicable to scientific studies, particularly astrophysics. You just accumulate these things. So my dozen or so evidences for near-death experiences, a dozen or so lines of evidence for deathbed experiences, it's a cumulative case. You look at them all and you say, does this fit better with the afterlife or does it fit better with the dying brain hypothesis? And that's what we do often in science when we found something new. We say, well, do we believe in a multiverse or not? Well, look at the evidence around us, weigh the evidence, and see how it comes out. So that's called abduction. You infer to the best explanation. That's what we do in science. That's what I'm doing here. So I'll have a chapter on that actually in my next book that I'm working on in this, where I'm dealing with other people's objections.
And what would you say to someone who would say, well, this is just a natural hallucination that's happening of a degrading brain or a dying brain that is, being deprived of oxygen. And so everybody goes through the tunnel and the light because it's just a materialistic, naturalistic part of what the brain, everybody's brain experiences.
Sure. Well, Raymond Moody, in his 19th book, Life After Life, who kind of started this study of near-death studies, he posed these things. He said, okay, maybe it could be explained by lack of oxygen. And then he would come and say, now, this is why this doesn't fit, because some of these people were being monitored and I believe this was his explanation. At least it's been an explanation since then. But some people were not lacking oxygen at the time. So how would they have done it? And we know what happens with anoxia when somebody lacks oxygen. They very quickly, if they're lacking it enough or it's it's all cut off, they very quickly go unconscious. So even from the beginning, they're not thinking as clearly. They go from clear thinking to unclear thinking, and then they're unconscious. Well, that's not what people are experiencing in near-death experiences. They're experiencing what some would call is like a hyper-consciousness. And so what's happened over the years is people like, and I'll take this, my books here, Bruce Grayson at the University of Virginia, he went through a whole career as a psychiatrist, as a physician who can prescribe medication for psychiatric issues, studying these. And he just goes through chapter after chapter how I thought, okay, maybe it's caused by lack of oxygen. Maybe it's a hallucination. And he just shows how each of these naturalistic suggestions, and we ought to put up any legitimate hypothesis and examine it according to the data that we've got. But since then, see, we've almost got 50 years of study of near-death experiences.
Incredible.
One after another has just been canceled out by the data. Penny Sartori, who did her dissertation on near-death experiences in England, Wales, that area, she wrote down not just the people that had near-death experience, but the people who had hallucinations. And so she could study both of them. She could say, look at the differences. Here's this person having a hallucination who was burnt severely. And they had a hallucination that they were on a spit, I guess you call it, where something's being roasted over a fire. And it's just, but after they get up, they thought, oh, that was a hallucination. They know that. And hallucinations differ in all kinds of ways from each other. I mean, they're just very, very different, just kind of like our dreams. So why is there this consistent hallucination, if it were that, of people from all kinds of backgrounds? It just wouldn't make sense. So there are very good answers. One book, Science and the Near-Death Experience by Carter, he goes through one after another of the naturalistic explanations and says, this just doesn't fit the data that we have from near-death experiences. Plus, and I'm going to mention a couple of general things. Bucky, who I mentioned earlier, who had this experience, he was not dying. So he was not lacking oxygen. You can't say, oh, a DMT type substance was probably going through his brain right before he died. He wasn't about to die. So shared death experiences are not explained by this. Also, the crisis apparitions that we mentioned from deathbed experiences, that's being experienced by people whose brain is not dying. So the dying brain hypothesis just does, no matter what you come up with, that's not explained by these people. And he can't explain it as expectations because they weren't expecting this person to die and didn't even know that the person was ill.